Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I wanted to talk about color theory 101 because I think that a lot of people have questions on how to pick good colors, whether they're coloring or painting or using pencil, like color pencil media, or any kind of color media. So we're just gonna start with the basics and go from there. Feel free to pause and take notes if you want to. I'm just kind of going to go through this as fast as I can because there's a lot of information and I don't want this video to be too super long. So first off, we're just going to talk about the color wheel, which is one of the most popular ways of arranging colors. There's other models that you can follow, but this is the most wide known, so that's what I'm going to go with. So we're going to start off with talking about primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue. And these are the colors that make up all the other colors in the color spectrum. You mix any combination or ratio of these three colors together and you can get any other color. It is kind of hard, but like if you're painting and you're only using red, yellow, and blue, but it is possible. Anyways, secondary colors are where you mix red and yellow and get orange. You mix yellow and blue and get green. And then you mix red and blue and get violet or purple. And then we're going to talk about tertiary colors, which is a combination of a primary color and a secondary color. So we have red violet, red orange, yellow orange, yellow green, blue green, and blue violet. And let me pull this a little closer so you can see this diagram. Right there. Okay, so also black, gray, and white are neutral colors. And they are mixed into these colors to make tints, shades, and tones. But before I talk about that, I wanted to add these aren't the only colors in the color spectrum. You can keep mixing like colors together and getting all sorts of combinations where they're only like a slight difference between them, and it takes a lot of training to discern between those more complicated colors. But so a tint is when you add white to a pure hue. A great example of this is when you mix white with red, you get pink. And you can get differing shades of pink depending on the amount of white that you're mixing into that red. And also those later variations on red, mixing white into those makes different tints of red. A shade is when you add black to a pure hue. So you're going to get more deep, kind of brownish. Like the more black you add, the deeper and like intense kind of, not as saturated kind of intense, but just like dark intense. That color will get. And then a tone is when you add gray to a pure hue, and that's when it becomes more of kind of a more neutral color. Not as in neutral this way, but like softer, but not as soft as tint will be. Okay, so also there are warm colors, which are on more this side of the color spectrum, and then there are cool colors, which hang out more on this side. And that's important because when you're creating art or using color in any way, depending on how you're using those colors, you'll want to make sure you balance out your cool and your warm colors if you're using a more intense color scheme. But with that said, in the red spectrum, there can be warm reds and there can be cool reds. Warm is when you add yellow to a color, and cool is when you add more. Wait, I think warm is when you add orange or yellow, and cool, to make a red cooler, you would add blue or green, just like a little bit, because those colors can travel pretty far. So moving on to color harmonies or color schemes. First off, I want to say that all colors look good together, but there are certain tools and schemes that you can use to make a more harmonious or balanced piece of work. So a complementary, well, first off, there's a monochromatic color scheme, and that is when you take and you just use shades and variations of that same hue. A lot of people think it is just black and white, but it can be just red and its tints and its tones, or sorry, tints and shades. And then the next most simple complementary color scheme that most people know about is the complementary color scheme, where colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel will always look good together. But you have to be very careful in finding a good balance, or else it'll become too jarring, because these are very vibrant colors, and with more saturation it's harder to control. So one way that you can use for example, red and green complementary color scheme without making it look like it's full-blown Christmas is taking more tints of the red and using green and then tones of green. So you're gonna use one of these two colors more as a dominant color, and then use tints and tones, and then what I like to do is to add on either red or green a tertiary color that's next to it. And I don't remember the name, if there is one for that kind of color scheme where you use both complement colors and the ones next to it. It's like a analogous complementary scheme, I guess. Which brings me to the next color scheme, which is an analogous scheme, and that's when you use the colors next to each other on the color wheel. So you can use orange, yellow, and yellow, green, and have a very, very harmonious color scheme for whatever you're doing. They match well, and they tend to create serene and comfortable to look at designs. And generally you want to have one color that dominates, another color that supports that dominating color, and then the third color and any others that you add on here are going to be accenting these first two colors. So the next color scheme that you can use is a triadic color scheme, and that's when you use colors that are evenly spaced on the color wheel. So red, yellow, and blue, orange, green, and violet are just a couple of examples. So for this one also, you just want to choose one color that dominates, and then the violet and the orange would accent it. And if you have something that has a lot of elements, don't forget you can use tints, shades, and tones to create different ranges of that color. You don't have to only use the saturated color that you have. You can use a light purple and a dark purple if purple is your color scheme, and then a super deep purple, and then use oranges and greens to complement those purples. The next is a split complementary, and this is similar to what I do. So you choose the base color, let's say green, and then you use the colors that are next to its complement. So it would be green, red, violet, and red, orange. And this is a really, really, really great color combination if you want to have a strong visual contrast without having to battle with such a strong connection as red and green have. So it has less visual tension with a strong visual contrast. And again, you want to have a more dominant color, and then these ones kind of support that. Okay, now we're gonna get a little more crazy. So there, you can use a double complementary color scheme. So you could use yellow orange and blue violet, and red violet and yellow green, or any combination of complementary colors. So you could even do an more analogous version, do red and green, red, orange, and yellow green, and you'll get a really nice look with that. And the distance between the pairs that you select will affect the overall contrast. So if you use blue, violet, and yellow, orange versus red and green, you'll have a greater contrast than if you use two complementary colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. And then we have another double complementary scheme that's more rigid, and that is a rectangle. So you use 4 colors in complementary pairs in a way that they're the same, like a set distance. So it would be, for this one, for example, red, orange, green, and blue, because it makes a rectangle on the color wheel. So that's gonna, if you want to do a rectangle, just make sure that you choose 2 colors, so this one and this one. So you skip a color and then you use its complements. And then a square color scheme is similar to a rectangle, but the colors are evenly spaced. So that would be red, yellow, green, and blue, I believe. Yeah. So that one you would have 2 in between if you're just basing it off of this color wheel. I think that's all of like the basic color schemes that you can use. You can branch off of all of those, kind of like how I've done, where I combine analogous and complementary. You can, for split complementary, you can use 4 colors and use all of its complements. And also don't feel like you have to stay rigid to just these colors because there are so many other combinations and variations that will, if you just keep this basic model in mind, then you'll be able to create some successful color schemes in what you do. Now I want to show you some examples of some of the pages that I've colored in my coloring books of some of the color schemes that I've talked about. Now, I wish I could show some of my physical work, but it's all packed away right now, so that's kind of a no-go if I want to get this video done. Okay, so in here I have an example of a monochromatic, excluding her skin, more monochromatic color scheme that I did with colored pencils. I also have, so this one uses two complementary colors. I have blue and orange, and red and green, and also the background is more of an analogous color scheme with the orange fading into yellow and lighter yellow. And that creates a very harmonious feel that kind of ties that together. And that's another tip, is you can pick a complement and then pick that analogous scheme, and it'll harmonize your picture very nicely. And this one, we have a lot of colors all over. So this one is more of an example of a triadic color combination because we have kind of a red-violet, we have blue, and we have some yellows and tints and tones, and just like variations on those. And this one right here, this is a primarily complementary because we have purple that fades because of, well, so the background is kind of analogous because we have purple and then we have more of a red violet that's really light, and then we have yellow, the complementary color to purple, but it is also analogous because it goes from orange to yellow. So you can definitely combine color schemes and create a really nice visual concept. Or if you want to add all colors like this, we have all of these. I would recommend having instead of having colors throw up everywhere, have it planned and have your focal point be something very simple. Otherwise, your eye won't know where to look. Okay. In seasons, this one I actually did. This is one of the latest ones that I've done, and I love it because I think it shows a great example of using, these are more, oh, sorry, I just bumped the camera. Okay, so her shirt is a tone of green. This green complements this girl's hair, and she also has tones in her hair. The red is analogous with this yellow, yellow-orange, and orange that has a tone added in it. The yellow is complementary to the purple flowers, and the purple is also analogous with the red in her hair and with the birds. And I really wanted to show this, even though that explanation is really kind of complicated, because this has a lot of elements, but it doesn't feel chaotic because I stuck to a more analogous theme, which creates harmony, but I also use complementary colors to create strong contrast. And with all of these elements, I found ways to tie these other elements in with other colors in the picture by adding tints and tones. Like these flowers are different specimens than these, so instead of trying to come up with a whole different color flower, I used some of the same colors that I used in these flowers and added them to this, and then used more tints of this purple in these flowers. And I hope that made sense. I want to show you a really good example of a complementary color scheme that I've done in the Morphia. It's this Medusa. And this is kind of more complementary +1. So it's red and green, and then I added some blue-green. Just because I feel like when you have a complementary color scheme, if you add a color that's right next to it, it helps balance it out and make it feel less intense. I think this is a really good example of a successful complementary color scheme. Let's see. Okay, I also wanted to show this one, because this one has more browns, which are tints and tones of other colors. But I want to kind of share how I did this because it's got little details everywhere. So what I did was I chose my main color, which was the background, and that's kind of an orangey background. And then I had to decide what I wanted all my elements to be. So I decided blue for these berries would contrast with this yellow orangey background, because it's close enough to orange that it'll complement and still have some nice contrast. And then I decided to use red because red is close to orange on the color wheel, and so it'll work. Sorry, I just forgot my words. It'll harmonize well, but be a different enough color that it's not blending into the background. And I also used pinks to go with the reds because they're just a variation of red. So it still will look good with whatever color I'm trying to pair it with. And then I obviously, because leaves are green, that's how I colored them. But the vibrancy was important because there's a lot of tints in here, and I didn't want the leaves to become too dark. And so it's very light. And I actually used some more yellow green, which also is on the orange, yellow green. So I have red, I have oranges, and then I have some yellows and yellow green. and I go to green and blue. So I used a lot of colors on the color wheel, but the way that you make that work is you decide what you want to be the focal point and what else is just accenting those colors. And I'm hoping I'm not making sense and not just making it more confusing on how to pick a color scheme. This is another just super quick example. I have reds and oranges, so red and orange, and purples. So I have red. So I have, if you were to look at this versus the color wheel, I have orange and some violet, or orange, red, violet, blue, violet. And I don't have every, I don't have any red violets in there, but it's still kind of an analogous scheme. So you can skip a color in the color wheel and still kind of have that harmonious feel. So there's that. Trying to think of what other. Okay. This one, I have one in here. Okay. Here we go. So I decided to do red flowers because they contrast with green very well. I made the ball of pink because that's a tint of red and it's a different color. So it kind of creates, like, when you have a lot of little elements and you want to use a different color that's not red, but you don't want it to clash, use a tint or a tone. And then I used blue and violet, like a tint of violet. So here we have blue and red, right? Blue and red. Blue and red make a violet. So that's another kind of combination that you can use that's not like something that they put in a textbook. Is you can use what the primary colors make as another color in your artwork or your coloring book or whatever you're doing. So I kind of also just want to say that it takes a lot of practice and a lot of you just have to experiment. So I kind of want to explain my process for how I choose my colors, because I don't think about the color wheel very much anymore. It's just it's something I naturally am able to decide now, just because I've done it for so long that I don't have to think about, oh, is this triadic or is this split complementary or whatever. I just kind of have put in enough hours that I naturally do that. So here's kind of my process. I'll look at a picture and then I'll decide what I want my focal point to be. Well, I want my focal point to be this lady. So I chose the color of her dress to be purple. Excuse me. After I colored her dress, I looked at the other elements and I decided that I wanted to make these blue. Well, this is more of a blue-violet. Blue sits right next to blue-violet. And so I used my blues and my lighter blues, which are tints of blue, to color in these flowers. Now, because all stems are naturally mostly green and combinations of green I don't really worry about them as much when I'm coming up with a color scheme. I do try to use different types of greens for different plants, but I did not really think very much or as much about my greens other than this blue is not super saturated, so I'm going to have a more neutral green. After I colored these flowers, I decided to do these flowers. Now they have orange and yellow in them. Orange are complementary to blue. Yellow are complementary to purple, and I have some purple up here. And it's close enough to blue violet that it looks nice. So then I colored these, and because these are very saturated, I made these leaves more saturated green. Saturated, also I forgot to mention, is when it's as close to the pure hue as the color can be. So it's not mixed with anything else. And then for the background, it was a little harder. I had to think about it a lot more, and I decided to go with a tinted, well, it's kind of more, I can't really, some could say it's a tone, but I'm going to say it's more of a tint of yellow, of more like a yellow-orange maybe, because it ties into the flowers and it complements very nicely with this purple, but it's different enough from the other yellows that I've used that it doesn't compete with any of the other elements. It just complements everything else. So that's kind of my process. And when I'm choosing colors, like, okay, what yellow do I want to use? I use my color chart, but there's a set of pencils that I have that I don't have one for that, and so I just scribble on a paper and then decide. I just look at it and I say, is this saturated enough? Is this warm enough? And I just realized that I forgot to talk about using warm and cool in your color combinations, because if you go too much a certain way, you'll want to add, like, this has a lot of, I would say this has a good balance of cool and warm, because the focal point is warm, the background is warm, and then these are more cool versions. Even though the yellow is warm, a warmer color, it has a lot of coolness in it. But yeah, I can just tell by looking at a color swatch if it's too bright, or like the wrong kind of tone or shade. And that just comes with practice, so that's what I would just encourage you to do. I also want to put together a video for different other ways that you can come up with color schemes, just because there's a lot of things and ideas out there, and you don't have to just stick to some rigid thing. So yeah, just explore, and I hope you found this video helpful. And if you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.